Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor. And today, I'm doing the favorite characters book tag. This tag was created by the Bookish Bryants a while ago. I think it was like 7 or 8 months ago. And I first saw it on Hey Y'all Listen Up. Hey You All Listen Up. The manliest booktube channel of all time. So Hey Y'all did this tag and it was great. And so I thought, I should do this tag. And then I didn't for like months. But here I am doing it finally. Finally, I'm doing this tag. So I'm going to talk about my 20 favorite characters in the form of a dopey top 20 list, because I love to do that kind of thing. So here it is, my 20 favorite characters. Who could they be? So, number 20 is San Dan Glocta from the first Law Trilogy. Creepy Glocta from the first Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Everybody loves Glocta. Well, not everybody does, because he's so creepy, but he's a great villainous character that you love because, you sympathize with this guy. He's been through hell, this guy. And, he's kind of evil. Yeah, but, you like him. And you kind of hope for the best for him, oddly, even though he's so, awful. Glocta, yeah. Great character, man. And definitely my favorite character from the first Law Trilogy. Number 19, Happen Leonard. Yeah, that's two characters, but I'm pretending they're one because you can't separate these two. These best friends from East Texas, from the Happen Leonard novels by Joe R. Lansdale. A fantastic series of novels you should read because they're so great. Happen Leonard. Their adventures began back in the 80s. And Joe Lansdale's been pretty much writing these characters since the 80s. So there are a few novels in this series. I think my favorites are the novels from the 80s, the earlier novels. Excuse the beeping. Every time somebody opens a door here now, there's like this beeping and it's awful. I will continue. So yeah, Happen Leonard. Great characters. They, spend a lot of time getting into trouble in this series of crime novels. And some great plots. They're tremendously entertaining, and these are just great characters. Wonderful friends who are very different from each other, and yet, get along just swell. So that was Happen Leonard. Number 18, Dartagnan. Dartagnan from the Three Musketeers. And that series of books, the Dartagnan series of books by Alexandre Dumas. I love this guy. He starts off as a hot-headed kid going to make it in the big town, in the big city. And he has some really interesting experiences. He runs afoul of the Three Musketeers, the world-famous Three Musketeers, whom all become his friends. He becomes great friends with the Three Musketeers. And they have a series of fantastic adventures. And he grows up a lot in the first novel, The Three Musketeers. And by the second novel, 20 years after, he is a different character. Not everything has gone his way. But really, really fun. Fun series of books. Interesting character. He's always entertaining, D'Artagnan. And so, yeah, he's one of my favorites. He's number 18, which brings us to number 17, the Vampire Lastat. The Vampire Lastat from Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles. I really like this guy. He's so comfortable being a vampire. It took a little bit, but eventually he became very comfortable being a vampire. I like the Vampire Lestat. Dangerous guy to be around, but entertaining. It's always entertaining to read about him. And I think I wasn't really on his side so much in the first book, Interview with the Vampire, but he definitely won me over in The Vampire Lestat, the second novel, which is still my favorite novel. Great character, which brings me to a very different character, number 16, Lou Archer. Lou Archer from Ross MacDonald's detective series, the Lou Archer series. One of the greatest series of detective novels ever. And Lew Archer is a really interesting character. It takes a while to get to know this guy because in the Lew Archer novels, the focus is usually on the other characters, the characters in the mystery, the characters that Lew Archer is working around or working for. And, the focus is on them, seeing through him. But he's a decent guy. He's a sharp detective. He has a generous heart. He always wants to help people, this guy. I really like Lew Archer a lot. And the more books you read about him, the more you like him, I think. So that's Lew Archer from the Lew Archer series of detective novels by Ross MacDonald, which I highly recommend. Which brings me to number 15, Marcato from Best Served Cold. Another Joe Abercrombie book. This is one of my favorite fantasy novels, actually, and definitely one of my favorite tales of revenge. Some foolish people tried to kill her off, and boy, was that a bad idea. She got together a team, a shady team, to take out these guys. And things went south, of course, but, it's pretty awesome. She's super tough. She's super cool. She's, ruthless. And it's fun to see her take revenge on all these ghastly characters. Does she come out on top at the end? What do you think? So, that was Mazza Mercato. That brings me to number 14, a very different fantasy character, Gandalf. Gandalf, I love Gandalf. We all love Gandalf, let's be honest. He's the fantastic wizard from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He's wise. He's kind of scary sometimes. He's this wizard that's been around for like forever. But he's also very relatable. He's a great friend. He's funny. He loses his temper sometimes. He's just a really entertaining character. And he's the guy everybody wants around on their adventure. Gandalf, always the most valuable player on any quest, Gandalf. I love Gandalf, which brings me to a very different fantasy character. Number 13, Solomon Kane. Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane, the Puritan adventurer, who I am talking about at the present time on the Robert E. Howard Show every Monday. Solomon Kane. I really like this character. He's a really original, really different character. You don't get too many Puritan adventurers running around fiction, but here you go. You got this one who feels like he has a mission from God to right wrongs and protect the innocent. And when he takes on a mission, he sees it through to the end. And usually it is a mission full of supernatural scariness involving magic and monsters and who knows what else. Great series of stories that you can find in the book The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard, which I highly recommend, which brings me to number 12, The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo. I think that beard is fake. You can't fool me, Count. He fools a lot of other people, though. The Count of Monte Cristo. Another great tale of revenge. Probably, definitely the best tale of revenge out there. Some foolish folks tried to frame this innocent guy, and they had to suffer 1,000 pages of revenge. Great book, The Count of Monte Cristo. One of the best books ever. So yeah, get to know the Count. Pick up that book. It'll take you a while, but it'll be tremendous fun while you're reading it. So that was number 12, which brings me to number 11, Elric. Elric. The ruler of Melniboné. Elric. With his cursed sword, Stormbringer. The scariest sword in all of fantasy fiction, Stormbringer. Elric, man, the doomed Lord Elric, who used to keep himself strong with drugs because he's just naturally a weakling and sickly. but then he gets Stormbringer and he uses it and he can suck out your soul with Stormbringer. And sometimes you're just hanging out with him and you're like, hey, how you doing, Elric? And he's like, hey, how you doing? Oh, sorry, man. Didn't mean to suck out your soul. He's a dangerous guy to hang out with, Elric. And this is a dark series of fantasy books, man, Elric series. If you read them in the order that they were published, like, everything's going to go to hell, but you just keep reading anyway because it's a great series of fantasy stories, really interesting. Elric, a very dark character, very complex character, and very fun character to read about. I like Elric an awful lot. So yeah, that was number 11, which brings me to number 10, a different sort of adventure character, Doc Savage, probably the ultimate adventure character. Doc Savage, who's a physical marvel and a genius. I mean, he's a genius, but he keeps buying the cheapest shirts around. They tear every time he moves, apparently. But, he's Doc Savage, who has his own team of crime fighters. He fights crime back in the olden days in the 30s and 40s. Doc Savage. The ultimate pulp adventure character, was very influential on every comic book superhero that came after him in the comic books. And he's still a lot of fun to read. I'm rereading all the early Doc Savage books. I'll probably read all the Doc Savage books all over again. There are quite a few, actually, that I've never read. But what a lot of fun his books are. Doc Savage. Which brings me to number 9. The Frankenstein Monster. The Frankenstein's Monster. From Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We're talking about the literary characters. So, the literary character, the Frankenstein Monster, which is an intelligent creature who has been wronged by that no-good Frankenstein. Boy, that guy's a jerk. Low-life Frankenstein. Made this creature. He didn't turn out just how he wanted, so he just abandons him. Just because he's not very pretty. But you know what? He's a great character. He's really interesting. Another character that, because of his experience, or lack of it, and what he has to deal with, he ends up doing some terrible, terrible things. But you know what? Despite the really awful things he does, and he does some awful things, we're kind of on this guy's side, the Frankenstein's Monster. Hard not to sympathize with him, the Frankenstein's Monster. Hey, let's go to a different character now. Number 8, Bilbo Baggins. It's Bilbo. I love Bilbo from The Hobbit. It could be because The Hobbit was one of my favorite books when I was a kid, if not the favorite book that I read when I was a kid. I loved The Hobbit. Just read it fairly recently after not reading it for 20 years, and it's just as great now. I love Bilbo just as much as I ever did. Not your typical adventure character, Bilbo Baggins. But again, very resourceful. Gandalf was smart when he picked Bilbo for that adventure. So Bilbo's great. I love Bilbo. I loved him in The Hobbit. I liked him when he showed up again in Fellowship of the Ring. Love that character, Bilbo. Definitely. Which brings us to number 7, John Carter. John Carter of Mars, Edgar Rice Burroughs' character who began his career in A Princess of Mars, where he mysteriously was transported to Mars and had a ton of adventures and went from nothing to becoming a great warlord of Mars, one of the most powerful people on Mars, in Edgar Rice Burroughs' fantastic old-timey science fiction series, which is a ton of fun. I like John Carter because, he's just so heroic. He's not the smartest guy in the world. You know what I'm saying? But not the smartest guy, but incredibly brave, extremely noble, and a tremendous fighter. He's the greatest fighter ever. He'll tell you how great he is. He's not a humble guy, John Carter. I like him. He's just so naturally heroic. This is like the one thing I really didn't like about that John Carter movie that they came out with a few years ago is that they made John Carter a reluctant hero because Hollywood always has to do that. John Carter is the opposite of that. He is not a reluctant hero at all. Which brings me to number 6. We're on number 6. The Shadow. The Shadow. This is the pulp version of The Shadow. The pulp version. So, you know, in the radio show, he was just an invisible crime fighter. Never seen, only heard. Like Jeremy Fee. But the pulp version of The Shadow, if you turn the lights on, there he is. And if you're a criminal, you're probably going to die. Because, you know, vigilantes from the 30s, you don't want to mess with them. Particularly this one. This was the darkest vigilante around, The Shadow. He had a whole team of agents. Vigilantes and crime fighters back in the day liked to have agents to help him out. And he had a vast network of them. But when, you know, it really hit the fan, The Shadow himself would show up. And he'd just take everybody out. He was great, The Shadow. Which brings me to an even darker character. Number 5, Dracula. Dracula. From Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is the baddest guy around, Dracula. I love this book, Dracula. He just seemed so dangerous in that book. I mean, he's just creepy. He's a really creepy, insidious, and yet powerful character. And he's just ruthless and so dangerous. I said he was dangerous already, but he really was. And you know what? You definitely wanted this guy killed off because he's Dracula. And yet, you kind of wanted more of him in the novel. You know, you wanted more Dracula. A little less Van Helsing would have been fine, and a lot more Dracula would have been good. But you know, the novel was great. So Dracula, I love Dracula, which brings me to number 4, Tarzan. Tarzan of the Apes. Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan. Great character, Tarzan. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the Tarzan from the movies. All of the movies. I don't know that they ever got Tarzan right in the movies. Even that last movie they came out with a few years ago, I thought maybe the Legend of Tarzan, I thought maybe that would be okay. But no, Tarzan just got his ass kicked by everybody in that movie, like through the whole thing. So that wasn't Tarzan. The real Tarzan, you don't mess with this guy. Raised in the jungle by apes, and he could just like, he just kills everything. I mean, he is just a killing machine, Tarzan. And he was barely, you know, he barely turned to civilization. He was never comfortable in civilization. Of course, he is Lord Greystoke. So he's actually an English lord, as it turns out. A role he's never comfortable in. But he's also never completely comfortable in the jungle either. He's of two worlds, fully at home in neither one. He's just a great character. Really smart character, really intelligent. That's one of the interesting things about him, is that he's so smart. Something you don't get in the films at all, ever. So yeah, Tarzan. I love Tarzan. Everybody knows I love Tarzan. But that brings me to a character I haven't talked much about for some strange reason. Number 3, Philip Marlowe. Philip Marlowe, the great detective from Raymond Chandler's series of mysteries. I love Philip Marlowe, and I love all of his novels except for maybe the last one, which wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't great. Playback, I think it was called. But everything up to that point was fantastic, including the short stories that he was in. Really interesting detective. He was a noble character in a terrible world. As Raymond Chandler said, down these mean streets, a man must go who is not himself mean. That would be Philip Marlowe. You know, he was a good guy, a decent guy, who, despite, you know, working in this crime-ridden cesspool of a city, and, you know, how dark his profession could get, he was a trustworthy guy. He was a good guy. So Marlowe. Philip Marlowe. I love that character. I love those books. You should read those books. Which brings me to number 2. Only 2 left. You're probably not going to be surprised by either one. But number 2 is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. And you're like, number 2? Yeah. He is, actually. I had to think about this. But yeah, Sherlock Holmes. As great as he is, and as much as I love Sherlock Holmes, he's number 2. But I love Sherlock Holmes. I'm obsessed with Sherlock Holmes. I've got multiple editions of Sherlock Holmes for no reason. But, you know, the Master Detective, who is a fascinating character, and his relationship with Watson is the greatest literary friendship in literature, I think, in my opinion. Opinions differ, but, you know, it's hard to beat Holmes and Watson. Tremendous characters, both of them, and Sherlock Holmes is just, you know, he's fantastic. He's Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. Which brings me to number 1, Conan. Yes, Conan. He's not the most politically correct character, Conan. I should get rid of that picture and change it just so I don't offend anybody's delicate sensibilities. So, and we'll choose another one. So Conan, you know, another character who started with nothing. He came down from the hills of Samaria with nothing and became, after a series of adventures and many different jobs, the greatest king of his world, King Conan. And so his saga that Robert E. Howard told so magnificently, he didn't tell the stories in chronological order. They skipped around all over the place, which was kind of an interesting way to read them, actually. But, you know, you get to go and see these different episodes throughout Conan's life, and he's always doing something different. You know, he starts off as a thief, he was a mercenary for a while, he was a general, he was a pirate. He did a lot of stuff, Conan. And he had his own code of conduct, but you know what? He was always out for number 1, Conan, you know. He was that type of guy. He was interesting. And he was really, really smart and really, really good at what he did, which, by and large, was combat. He was, at heart, a professional soldier, a professional mercenary, and a great warrior. But he also had a wonderful tactical mind. So when he became a general, he was an awful good one. And he was a really good king, actually. Conan's character changed over time, so that by the time he became a king, he found himself feeling very responsible for his subjects. Even when it would have been better for him, perhaps, to have just given the whole kingship thing up, he wouldn't do it, because people were counting on him. And he did have a sense of responsibility. Like when he was a general, he felt responsible for his soldiers. You know, when he led bandits, he felt responsible for his bandits. I mean, he was that type of guy. Really, a lot more interesting than you might think, this character, if you only know him from the adaptions, the watered-down Conans you might see in the movies, or that terrible TV show, and there was a cartoon. Forget all that stuff, you know, and just go to the source. Go to the Robert E. Howard stories. That is the real Conan, and he is my favorite. He'll probably always be my favorite. Hard to top Conan the Barbarian. So that was that. That was my 20 favorite characters. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next time. I hope I'll have something up tomorrow. It's going to be a little tricky these next couple days. I'm going up to the Rustic Fawn Lodge. So, yeah. So Sunday Penguin actually might be late because the internet up there is terrible. Might be the Monday Penguin. I'll see what I can do, guys. Okay, I'll catch you next time.